My name is Samantha Berg, and I'm a former SeaWorld animal trainer. I worked there from 1990 to 1993. Worked there for 3.5 years. I have a degree from Cornell University in animal sciences, and I was intending to become a veterinarian. And after I graduated from college, I got a little sidetracked, and I went back to thinking about what I wanted to do when I was a little kid growing up. And I remember watching some programs on TV, Jacques Cousteau's Undersea World and Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, and thinking that I really wanted to work with dolphins. And so I thought, if you want to work with dolphins, at the time I didn't think about working with them in the wild. My understanding was if you want to get up close and personal with dolphins or whales, you go to a place like SeaWorld. So what I did was I sent resumes. At the time there was no internet, so it was late '89. I went to the library. I got a list of all the marine parks and aquariums in the U.S. There's about 26 of them, and I sent out a cover letter and a resume to all of the marine parks and aquariums, and I got a letter from SeaWorld in January of 1990 offering me an interview. So I was in New York at the time, and I flew down to SeaWorld of Orlando, and I did an interview, and I took a swim test, and I got the job. So that's how I started.
Okay. How and when did you discover that these animals are not coping well with captivity?
It's a really good question, because when I was there, part of my situation, my training as an animal science major, I had a very utilitarian view of working with animals. I felt like I was there to do a job and the animals were there to do a job. So at the time when I was employed there, I didn't actually see anything wrong with captivity. I saw a lot of things about the way the animals were treated, and animals dying early and animals dying pretty horribly, and a lot of things that I questioned, but ultimately, because of my mindset, I did not see captivity as a whole as being wrong. What woke me up, and this is quite embarrassing for me, but the moment that I woke up was the day that Dawn Rancho was killed at SeaWorld of Orlando in February of 2010. I was watching the news coverage and seeing the pictures of her lying down in the slide-out area in front of Tilikum, the whale that killed her, and at the same time hearing the company say that she was responsible for her death. And I knew immediately from looking at the pictures, just because what I knew about the whale's history and the way the company works, I knew that they were lying about her death, and that she would never have put herself in that position had she not done it many times before. So that's really when I woke up and I started thinking about all of my experiences at SeaWorld, and I started to question everything, and at that point is when things started to unravel for me.
Because what did you think when you were working there about the criticism from activists, from NGOs?
Yeah, I was very young when I started, so I was 22 years old, and I believed what the company told me about anybody who came to SeaWorld who claimed to know more about dolphins and whales than they did were pretty much written off as activists. In SeaWorld, the worst thing that you can say about somebody is that they're an animal activist. That's like calling somebody a bad word or a bad name, and SeaWorld would basically, even scientists that were well known in the field by SeaWorld, they actually considered them activists, and that's how they trained their staff. It's a very cult-like environment. So when they would even be famous whale biologists or activists, it didn't matter, out in the audience, we were told not to interact with them as trainers, and SeaWorld was very insular. They told us that SeaWorld was the world's foremost facility for killer whale research, study, and display, and we would say that every day in the show. So we believed, the trainers working there, and myself included, believed that they were the experts. Mm-hmm. And so it never even occurred to me to talk to the activists or the scientists, because I didn't think they had anything to teach me, because I believed what the company said.
And in a nutshell, can you summarize what the problem with orcas in captivity is?
Well, there's so many issues with orcas in captivity, but I mean, we know they're highly social, very intelligent animals. They live in large family groups. Male killer whales, at least off the San Juan Islands population, they don't leave their mother's side. They spend 70% of their time within a couple of body lengths from their moms. And SeaWorld moves their whales around throughout the company all the time. They're changing the social structure. These animals swim 80 to 100 miles a day looking for food in the wild. In captivity, they don't get any. They have 1/10,000th of the space that they would have access to. Their health is very poor. The mortality rate in captivity, that whales in captivity die, it's 2.5 times higher than the whales in the wild. The average lifespan for a killer whale entering one of SeaWorld's facilities, which again are probably some of the top facilities in the world, is only about 10 years, as long as they live. So there's a lot of issues, and I can go on if you want me to.
Do you think we can expect the same issues regarding other species of cetaceans like dolphins or beluga whales?
Absolutely. SeaWorld claims that dolphins and beluga whales adapt well to captivity, and they claim dolphins in particular are adapting well because they're breeding. That's one of the arguments that they like to say, is that they're breeding in captivity. Basically they're having sex, so they must be happy. And so, prisoners have sex, and that doesn't mean that they're happy. So I think that dolphins, because they're smaller, they seem to do better, but I think there's a lot of the same issues come up, especially in the interactions between the trainers and the animals. There's lots of injuries that happen with dolphins. To my knowledge, people have not been killed, but it's really only a matter of time, and there have been a lot of serious injuries. Beluga whales, unfortunately, they thought that they were initially, it seemed like beluga whales were adapting well to captivity, but now the research is showing that in fact that they're not, and they're not doing well in captivity at all, and they're trying to bring in beluga whales from the outside now, from the wild, to replenish their captive populations. Beluga whales live in pods of 200, several hundred individuals, and during breeding time up to 1,000 individuals, and they keep them at SeaWorld. I was there when they had 3 or 4 whales together, so again, they can't meet their social needs in captivity, not to mention their space needs.
So what's your impression about the captive breeding programs and their value to conservation?
Yeah, the captive breeding program is pretty horrific. I think SeaWorld likes to portray the captive breeding program as they're doing something better because they're not capturing the animals from the wild. But the way I've heard several other trainers describe it as, is kind of like an alien abduction. What we're doing to these animals is we're forcing them to breed at a much younger age than they would breed in the wild. A killer whale in the wild might have her first calf at 15 or 16 years old. These animals live human lifespans. So, the female killer whales can make it up to 80 or 90 years, and they actually go through menopause. So 15 or 16 years old makes sense to have their first calf. In the wild, so that's in the wild. In captivity, they're bred at around 5 or 6 years old, and then after that, they will continue to breed them as soon as their calf is weaned, and they go into estrus. They have another cycle. They'll inseminate them again and force them to have more calves. So to give you an example, Kalina, who was the first baby Shamu, the first captive-born killer whale to survive into maturity, she only made it to 25 years old, and then she died. So very young for a female killer whale. She was in poor health, and one of the reasons I believe she was in poor health is because I think she had 5 or 6 calves over that period of time, where a wild killer whale would have maybe had 1 or 2 calves over that time.
And the music that's always in the background of a show with these cetaceans, how does it affect them, and how does it affect them? The music and other noises in the artificial environment.
Well, we know that cetaceans, killer whales, and dolphins are very auditory animals, and that's one of the ways they navigate. And when you're in the water, underwater, and you hear the music playing, just from a human standpoint, you can hear it. There's vibrations going on, and I imagine that it's like being it's like being constantly in a crowded, noisy environment, and there's no place for them to go to get away from the sound. So I imagine it's very disruptive and uncomfortable for them.
So have you ever seen an orca or another marine mammal die?
I have not seen an orca die, but I have seen a couple of other animals die. I saw a false killer whale die, and I saw a dolphin die. The false killer whale was a pretty tragic situation. When I arrived at SeaWorld in 1990, there were four false killer whales at the Whale and Dolphin Stadium, and I was unaware. People would say that these animals were from Japan, and they would say kind of in a hushed tone, like, those animals are from Japan. I didn't even know what that meant. I know nothing about the dry fishery, and of course now I've seen the cove and I know how horrible it is. I just assumed that the Japanese facilities were not as good as SeaWorld, and that's why those animals came to us very sick. There was one animal in particular, her name was Zori, and she was very unhealthy from the beginning, from when I got there. And one day, about 2 months after I arrived at the park, I came in and Zori was showing extreme signs of distress. So somebody handed me a clipboard and said, start taking respirations on Zori. Just stay with her and just watch her. So I followed her around the pool for probably close to an hour, counting how many times she would breathe every 5 minutes, and she was starting to swim faster, and eventually she started to struggle to breathe because, again, these are mammals, so they breathe air, and as they're dying, they're struggling to stay above water so that they can breathe. So she started swimming faster and faster circles. They called the vets to come down to the stadium to watch and see if they could do anything. She started beating herself up on the side of the pool, just really violently. Her tail was slapping the water, her head was slapping the water. She slammed her head repeatedly on the side of the pool. Finally, all at once, she just threw up this huge amount of blood and guts. Like, it was not like nothing I've ever seen. It just like more and more just coming out of her mouth. And then she just slowly sank to the bottom of the pool, and that was it. And I remember the two of the veterinarians were standing on a bridge over the medical pool at the time, and they watched this whole thing. And one vet turned to the other and he said, "Gosh, I thought we were out of the woods with that animal." And that was it. That was all they said. And then Zori was taken out of the pool in a crane. She was moved to the freezer, basically, and they did a necropsy. And to my knowledge, what happened was her body was turned into fertilizer. I think that's what they did. In some cases in the past, the animals were actually dumped illegally, but I think at this point they were taken to a rendering plant, but I can't verify that, but that's what I was told happened to them after the necropsy. Another situation was a dolphin named Celeste. She was actually one of my favorite animals at the Whale and Dolphin Stadium. Her mom was Shannon, her dad was Lester, thus the name Celeste. Shannon, her mom, got a really bad fungal infection and died from complications of the medicine, the fungal medicine that she was given. So Celeste grew up without a mom and therefore was a very sub-dominant animal. And so the older females would bully this is a bottlenose dolphin, they would bully her and make her throw up her food. And so eventually it became more reinforcing for Celeste to throw up her food and play with it than it was to actually eat it. And at that point she started to slowly starve to death, despite the fact that we were tube feeding her, trying to get her water, trying to get her minerals, trying to get her vitamins. We could not stop her from throwing up her food. This was very upsetting to me because it was a training issue. It was a behavioral problem, and we were trainers. We were supposed to be able to solve this problem, and we couldn't do it. It was totally an artifact of captivity. This would never happen in the wild. So eventually this dolphin, who was just really like a cuddly teddy bear, I could jump in the water and wrap my arms around her and just hold her, and she was totally seemed to like that. I mean, she really did seem to had imprinted on humans. I just watched her turn into a skeleton and eventually die, and that was just horrible. And that would, again, that just, it was hard for me to make sense out of that because I didn't understand why we couldn't save this animal.
Right. You want a break?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Have you had an incident with an orca or another captive marine mammal, like an attack or harassment?
The worst that happened to me was I've got a bunch of otter bites. I was at Shamu Stadium for a year, and during the time that I was there, 6 months of that I was actually in the water swimming with the whales, but I didn't personally have any attacks. I read a lot about attacks, and I saw some issues where orcas were pulling on people's ponytails. When I was at Shamu Stadium from 1991 to 92, there was a couple of juvenile baby whales that were getting a little bit precocious and playing with the trainers' ponytails and holding on and not letting go. And eventually, one of those animals, Taima, she became an animal who was very difficult to work in the water with. She started out like that, and she just continued to get worse and worse. So she was a challenging animal to work with. But I didn't personally experience that. Mostly, I got bitten by otters.
Okay. So what do you think of activities where members of the public can interact with the animals, like swim with dolphins programs or dolphin-assisted therapy?
Yeah. So Dr. Lori Marino has written quite a bit about dolphin-assisted therapy. That's worth looking up on the internet. Dolphin-assisted therapy, the evidence is that it doesn't do anything, and it's just a way for these facilities to make money. It is dangerous to put humans in the water with dolphins, with whales. The chances of them getting hurt, the chances of the dolphins injuring the human are very high. And then also, again, because the situation where these animals are kept in, these facilities don't meet the animals' needs. So again, just like with the marine parks and aquariums, they're under a huge amount of stress. They're not normal social situations. They tend to act out. And once they reach a certain level of sexual maturity where they're getting very aggressive, they're no longer appropriate candidates for these swim-with programs or for the dolphin-assisted therapy. And where do they go? They end up probably in a place like SeaWorld and a dolphin petting pool, where they're subject to even more stress in these small pools with lots of animals where people are constantly reaching in and touching them, and they really can't get away from people. So it's a very unnatural life, and to me, it doesn't seem like that it's appropriate for these animals to end up in that kind of situation.
Okay. And last question: what would be a successful outcome of your European tour, along with promoting Blackfish and talking about your experience. What do you hope to see from all of
Well,
this?
the film does a really good job of showing what's gone on in SeaWorld in particular in the U.S., and it also looks at what's at the situation in Loro Parque. And I think that I'm hoping that the more people see this film, the more people will educate themselves and learn about the truth about what goes on in marine parks and aquariums, and they won't just believe what the companies are saying, because the companies are making money off of these animals every day. They're exploiting these animals for human entertainment, and people think that that's fine. That's a wholesome form of entertainment. It's a place that you would go to take your family on a vacation. And so I'm hoping that people get the message that no, in fact, this is not an appropriate way to spend your money, that people shouldn't be buying a ticket to these places. And in fact, the best thing to do with your money would be to go, if you want to see these animals in the wild, would be to go on a whale watch trip. And kids who want to work with, who their dream is to work with dolphins or whales, like mine personally was. I mean, I know now that even if it was my dream to work with a killer whale, I'm sure it was not the killer whale's dream to swim with me in a concrete tank. So I think that that it's teaching people that the best thing that we can do for these animals, real conservation work, is to encourage kids to become marine biologists or scientists or environmental conservationists and really learn about what we can do to heal the environment, to heal the damage that we humans have caused to the environment. And that's a much better use of our time and resources than going to see these animals doing stupid circus tricks in in an artificial environment.
Great. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I want water. Let's see.